Hello, my name's Lorne Mason. I am an amateur car enthusiast and I muck around with engines and cars for a hobby. I have no qualifications in that respect other than what I've picked up over the years with mucking around with other cars and other engines. On this tape, myself and Dave Andrews will hopefully show you how to modify a Rover 1.8 K16 cylinder head. We mainly concentrate on the non-VVC, but there are references to the VVC head in order to produce something of the region of 200 brake horsepower and around 150 to 160 pound-foot of torque. When you are watching this tape, please watch it from start to finish, and don't try starting work before you've watched the whole thing, because what you'll find is that I've actually made a few errors and things throughout the tape which are corrected during the course of the tape. Most notably, probably opening out the ports in the port area, and you'll see under the short term too much, which caused me some problems, resulting in me having to redo parts of the head and put larger valves in the end and different insets. So don't be tempted to follow it and do the thing gradually through the tape. Watch the whole thing. I have to say that I don't accept any liability or responsibility if you muck your head up, I'm afraid. And that's my disclaimer, folks, sorry about that. This is purely an amateur video and should be treated as such, and it's just hopefully to give some more people a bit of inspiration to try out these things for themselves. You can obtain more information by looking at the Dave Andrews website, or indeed the Emerald Cams website, which I have written on the tape, on the actual body of the tape. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the tape. Okay. What we've done so far, we've removed the head, and we've got it on the bench, or makeshift bench in this case, a floor. The floor is always a good place to work, because I tend to find that things drop on the floor quite frequently, and if the floor is where you're working, haven't got very far to drop. Okay, now once you've got the head off, you need to take the cam carrier off. I've already done this, but I'll just say roughly what I've done, which is, if you follow the instructions in the manual, these bolts here should be removed in a certain sequence, which is approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and the outside nuts moving this way, but you need to follow the manual to figure out how to do that properly. So you've got your bolts off, and you can then remove the cam carrier. Like so. And the inlet cam. Can hear the locals, and the exhaust cam. At this stage, you're then faced with all of the followers, or you would have been had I not already done this, and these are removed using a magnet which I've lost. Let's just pause while I find it. Well, I can't find the magnet in typical style, so you'll have to trust me. Basically just touch the top of the follower with the magnet and it will come out. And this one's going to come out one way or another. It was a bad idea putting this one back in. This is why you need a magnet, you see. Even though these have been cleaned up and the oil removed. Still not going to give me an easy time. And here's one I prepared earlier. I cheated, I turned the head upside down. You shouldn't do this because you'll mix up the cam followers. Notice that I've marked using a blue permanent ink pen, or engineer's blue pen. Each follower, and I've made a mark on the actual cam at the top of the head, whatever it is, so that I know where they come from, because they need to go back in the order that they came out, preferably, if they're going to be reused. Now, you can see the follower. We'll talk more about those later. Okay, this side of the head is the inlet side. I've cleaned it all up. Cleaned up all the faces and everything else. And the exhaust side, which you can tell because it's blackened. Right, here are the chambers. They're all been cleaned up, and they've got the standard valves in at the moment. And what I've done is to mark them using the blue pen again. I've marked the outer diameter, which should represent the chamber size, or the cylinder size rather, using the head gasket as a marker. So I placed the head gasket into position as accurately as possible, and then just marked around it, trying to keep the actual pen mark on the inside of the ring, because the actual ring is slightly larger than the diameter of the bore. So you've got to be careful about that. If in doubt, and you happen to have one to hand, you can use an actual liner. And once you've made your position, marked your position, you can place this into position and check and double check that you are actually representing the correct size. It's important because you're not allowed, or you shouldn't, to exceed the diameter of that outer circle, otherwise you get flow problems. Dave will be able to explain that a lot more, but it's obvious that you don't really want to be going over the edge and having little nooks and holes and things effectively in your bore. And what I've done is I've marked in blue the proposed areas that I'm going to try and grind away. So you're basically taking away between 1.5 and 2 millimeters of material around here and here, where it's kind of, well, there's a horrible little step there which you want to get rid of, and then just blending it in around here, making it nice and smooth. A similar but slightly smaller scale version of the same thing around the exhaust valves, and then just blending in this a lip here which is kind of blending in around there, and then just taking a minuscule of material from either side of the spark plug. But you don't really need to take much, if any, off of there, just smooth it out really. So I marked it all off so I don't go over my edges and end up mucking up the bore. Okay, so this is Dave Andrews, and we're going to show you how to do a gas flow and port job.
Basic tool specifications: carbide cutters. Excellent on aluminium, except they clog up a little bit, so they need some sort of lubricant like WD-40. You can get them from engineering suppliers or from the kit car shows even. I've found a few there. This one is the one that does the bulk of the work in removing valve guides. Rounded shape, cut tooth profile, it doesn't clog up too badly. Run that at high speed in a die grinder. That's the essential piece of equipment whenever you're cutting metal which is hard, and by hard I mean the valve guides and the valve seat inserts. When you're cutting soft material like the aluminium itself, you don't run these in a die grinder, it's much too fast. Generally run them in a variable speed drill with an extension. That's just a piece of mild steel turned down to fit the drill. 6mm hole in the end and a grub screw, and that will take any interchangeable 6mm tool like these. That lets you get up inside the ports without mashing the quality of the die grinder here, and at the right speed of course. These are what do the basic reshaping. This one particularly is very good. It has a continuous radius which varies. Have a large radius here and a smaller radius there, so you can get the shape of the valve throats quite nicely just by varying the angle of the tool. And this one is used specifically for trimming the insides of the valve seat inserts when you're going big valve. So you cut the insert down from the inside. Another essential piece of equipment, old K-series valves at various sizes. These are the gauge of size of the ports. The sizes are available on the website. You need something to determine whether or not you've got something to correct size. What better than a valve? Especially an old one that you're going to throw away, and you can use that to gauge. The other thing is, if these are turned down concentrically, you can also use them to ensure that when you open up the valve throats, that you've opened them up entirely concentrically. What you don't want to do is have an eccentric hole opening, otherwise the seat simply won't make it. And you can use these as gauges to ensure that you've got them correct. But before you start any porting, the first thing you have to do is inspect the cylinder head and make sure there are no faults, make sure the valve guides are in good order. Got a head here which I received this morning from Rat Race. They want a head doing. The first thing you do obviously is to strip the head and then give it a good look over. Make sure there's no machining shift. Quite often you find that the cylinder head is cast one way and then machined slightly off centre, so you get lips and nasties all around the inserts. This is a particularly good one. There's no problem at all with casting shift, but the inserts are quite heavily trammelled into the combustion chamber here, so there's a fair bit of material needs removing. Make sure you have a valve which is of a known stem diameter, and check the guides. There's no point in modifying a head which is completely knackered. If there's any damage to the casting, any cracks, any nasties, holes in the head, whatever, then make sure it can be repaired before you do work on it. It's pointless doing 50 hours work on a head that can't be used. These guides are in fact okay. So it's a head that can be modified. There are a couple of chips and nasties, but we can get rid of those with a skim. And the first job that I would do on this head is to open up the valve seat inserts. On this particular head, it's taking 26mm valves, so the inserts need to be opened up to around 23mm in 2 stages. At the moment they're much smaller than that, as you can see. I've got a 21.5mm valve here, that won't go down, so these are about 19.5mm across. They need to come out to 22 or 23, which is a fair amount of metal to go. And the way that you do that is with our trusty friend the die grinder. I've already inspected this head, so I know it's good. Spend some time looking at it, make sure there's nothing wrong with the bearing surfaces, make sure that the bores for the tappets are all clean and then there's nothing damaged. Okay, I'm now going to put a tool in the die grinder and we're going to have a hack at the head to get an idea. Just an ordinary engineering die grinder, maximum speed 35,000 RPM. It's wired up through a 1 kilowatt dimmer switch here so that I can vary the speed. What I don't want to do is to be turning it over at 35,000 RPM when I'm on a particularly sensitive part of the cylinder head. One slip, goodbye cylinder head, lots of grief. So the switch is set up with variable rheostat so that each position can be set by me. I've got quite a low speed which I use on delicate areas and a medium speed for hacking a fair bit of metal out. Very good. I'll show you what I mean. That's the low speed, higher, and that's, oh my god. So we start on the low speed and then use it at that. That's the tree-shaped cutter. And it's very important that if you're going to take out an insert that you stay absolutely parallel with the valve and guide line. Otherwise the insert ends up at an angle. You want the insert to be bowed out slightly towards the valve seat. If you look carefully at the guide angle, that's the angle at which you have to hold the die grinder. Okay, if you hold it at this angle, then the whole thing is slanted. So it must go in at that angle, the same as the stem of the valve. So once we've established the angle, turn on the die grinder. But before we do that, unless we want to die, Joe 90 time. Very important. This is very hard steel. If you get a piece in your eye, you'll know all about it. On goes the die grinder. That will happen at speed 2. Hold the die grinder very firmly. If it kicks back, you'll know all about it. And this is hard material, so we're on high speed. Never pull the die grinder out when it's actually touching the material. Get to the centre, pop it out, turn it off immediately, hang it out of harm's way. Now, one word of warning, die grinder can go through material really quickly, so you can always take more material out. Bloody sight more difficult to put it back again when you've taken too much out. So we start to get an assessment of how much material we've used. Not a great deal. We're not even out to 21.5 mil yet, so we can keep going. You can get a pretty accurate assessment of where the material is removed by looking at the thickness of the valve seat. If it's an even thickness all the way around, then you've been taken out evenly. If not, you can find out by placing the valve in and then having a look and seeing whether there are gaps around the circumference of the valve. At the moment there aren't any, so we're okay. Another useful tool, knackered old Hoover, bye-bye swarf. It's horrible stuff, very sharp. You get it in your skin, you'll know all about it, and you don't want to be breathing it in either. So if you're really keen, get the Hoover running all the time, stick it in the port, then do your grinding. Then all the swarf goes straight up into the Hoover instead of into your lungs. Here we go.
Okay.
This particular cutter has got an almost parallel side here and then a radius further up. So when you're first cutting the insert, you use this higher part here, and then when you want to invoke a slope on it, you use this part, so you gradually pull it out. I'm just going to assess it for size. It's about 21.5 mil now, almost, so it just needs a bit more removing, and then we're at the first stage, and then we can move on to the next one. As soon as this particular valve, my first sizing valve, 21.5 mil, will fit down into the valve throat, then the insert is at a nominal size that we can work from. At the moment there's just a little bit more to go, so we'll give it a bit of a more hack. If the tool gets clogged up with aluminium chips like it has here, just get an ordinary cheapo green pad, scrub it. That will get most of it out. And to stop it clogging up, I use a cheapo PTFE lubricant used for bike chains on my biking days. Pour that on, wipe off the excess and let it dry. That stops it clogging up. And if it does clog up, it makes it a lot easier to clean. So I'll put some on it. When it's next used, just let it dry. Okay, I think we've now got the throat to about the right sort of size, and we can use this turn down valve to check it. Yeah, that's about right. It's now past the insert and into the aluminium, so we now need to attack the valve throat area here and make it a reasonable size. It should be, when it's finished, around about 22.5 mil. But it's best to finish it to about 21.5 mil. That gives you a bit of latitude in case it's not concentric. And the way we find that out, we put the valve in. We know the valve will pass through, so we now eyeball it from here to see, is the gap wider this side or this side. You can then find out whether it's concentric. And there is something wrong, because with the valve freehand it will go past the insert, but with it being held concentric by the guide, it touches this side. So we need to, you can see where it's touching. So it's pretty important now that we remove some material around here. Yeah? So we've got a gap here and a gap all the way around, but at this point it's touching, so we're not entirely concentric. So this is the area that we need to attack. So I'll just do that quickly, marked it up. Felt tip pen will normally do that. This is the general porting cutter, which is used for most of the metal removal on inlet and exhaust ports, and you can use various parts of it to get the appropriate angle. It needs a blot of lubricants, just a touch, and then we'll have a go at the valve throat area, which needs to be marginally larger from the actual insert. Got the drills set at about 800 RPM. Small extension here, which basically gives me latitude. I can also see what I'm doing a lot more clearly than if it were directly in the drill. Here we go. Now, if we feel in here, there's a large bump there that's been put in there to protect this drilling, and a large bump the other side, and there are edges to the valve seat insert and general nasties. What we want to do is to get the air, well, the gas, out as smoothly as possible. As smooth as possible transition to the horizontal part of the port, remove any lumps and bumps, and we need the port to gradually increase in size from 21.5 to around about 23 or 24 by the time it hits the this side section of the head. So that turn there is going to hurt the flow quite considerably, and the turn here as well, where it comes into one, is going to hurt it, so we minimise the change of section there and the change of area. Here we go. Got the hoover on. Never trust your eyes when you're doing this. Your eyes will deceive you, because there's a change in colour of the material, and then in the map of the material, the surface texture changes. It can make you think there's a dip when there isn't one. Always use your finger, but just make sure the tool's out before you do. That's your best weapon, is your finger. That will tell you whether it's smooth. If you can feel something that isn't right, then you know it's there. Just make a note of where it is and go in and attack it. And here, that's still not right. There's a fair bit of material needed removing here. So sort of egg cup shape. Take the edge off the guide, and there's a large supporting boss in the exhaust port. A lot of that needs removing, but there's a waterway under it. We're going to remove most of it from the other side. What we do now here is blend in the side here and here, so we've got a nice smooth transition line from the throat to the port. Whoops. Always going to be a problem. Off the short turn here, that's very sharp on a standard head. You want to make sure that's as smooth as possible. And keep the radiuses of the long side of the port and the short side concentric. Yeah, that's quite nice now. That's about 22mm, tapering down to about 21.5. Now the rest of the port, where it thins, we're going to get to from the other side, which we'll do in a second or two. When you look in the port, you can see there's a very large bump, and that bump both supports the guide and helps the cooling in the port. You can see it quite clearly there. There's a bump, and that means the air has to turn over it. It hits this bit and then has to turn again, so that causes a lot of turbulence in the port.
There's a bump here.
Yeah, quite a large one.
It kind of comes up.
Yeah. You can get rid of most of that by taking the top of that bump down. You can't get rid of all of it or you go through to the waterway, but we can minimise it to about 10 to 15% of its original size. But you have to be extremely careful with the port line. You have to assess it first by taking the port line and making sure you hold your tool at that port line. It's very tempting to attack this front area here and try and go backwards. If you do, you'll hit the waterway. So we take it on the crest of the bump. And we'll have a little hand. Now here you have to be very careful that you don't hold the head. If you make a hole here, then you're into some fairly expensive repairs. So do it nice and careful. And we can also blend in what we've done at the top there into the rest of the port line at the side. Again, your finger is your friend here. Feel the shape, don't look, feel. You'll be able to feel any irregularities or bumps. What we're trying to do is to bring the port line gradually down so that it's a smooth line between the guide and the exit face. Now these corners at the exit face want cutting out a bit. That improves the port line considerably. A nice smooth continuous line out to the port face. I don't want to take too much off the front here because this is where the port will hold. I've had a good look at the section head and it's at its thinnest at this front piece here. So although you can take a little piece of material out there, you have to be very careful not to hold the head.
Have you ever actually gone through the head?
Yes, I have. And looking at it, the waterway on that particular port was much larger on the others, and they're not particularly well cast. But it was a mistake, and I won't do it again. It can be repaired, so it's not the end of the world, but it's much better that you don't do it. That's now a gentle bump rather than a big hump. Now the bifurcation here, the centre part, is way too wide. What we're aiming for here is a cross-sectional area around 21.5 to 22 mil. So the 21.5 mil valve should be able to push all the way up the port and it's nowhere near. So we want to try and minimise this section here without going through to the waterway and widen it.
A quick feel of that. So
This side section here.
this top bit here on between.
No, it's the bit in between the two ports there, the bifurcation.
Oh yeah.
That's way too fat.
Alright.
And the air has to turn around that. And we don't really want it to do that. We want it to come out as straight as we possibly can and not lose too much energy while doing so. This case here is particularly sensitive to exhaust. So the exhaust ports are particularly badly designed, so anything we can do to minimise the energy loss is going to be good news. So we'll attack the fattest part. Always keep the tool moving, never ever sit it in one place. Keep it moving around. Occasionally you may find that the tool bounces and runs around the port quickly. Switch it off straight away if it does that. That normally means that the cutting teeth are actually lined up exactly perpendicular with the wall and they all hit the wall of the port at the same time. That is bad news and that will mark your port. So that's also a good way to punch a hole through to the waterway. So take care. Top of the port here, by the valve throat, the tip of the guide needs taking off to give a nice egg cup shape around the back of the valve. And here you want a smooth transition from the valve throat into the port. And that means getting the tool into the corner here so that's a nice smooth curve, compound curve. The guide gets in the way at that point, so just remove it with the tool and here work out. You'll find it's only the leading edge of the guide there that gets taken away and that gives a nice transition then from throat line to port line. At this point, throat area and port area needs to be about 21.5 mil wide, which it is, damn close. It's about 1/4 of a mil out at the minute. I won't persevere with that, that's near enough, because when we polish it out with the finishing drums, that will take it out to 21.5, and the top of the port here, top when the head's up the right way, is more or less flat. It's taken this huge bump out of the port. The next area to address is the short turn, which we'll do looking down on the head stands. I'm just going to do the short turn now, which is this underside of the valve. The short turn of the port is the tight curve. around here it's important to make sure you don't have an edge like you do on the standard one, and also that the curve is concentric with the outer line of the port, the top area of the port there. So I can get in with this cutter on a slow speed and just work a gradual continuous radius around. So we'll put the tool in. It just bounced as you saw, which I was explaining earlier. Very careful. Make sure that is a continuous curve, and your finger here is your best weapon. It tells you where the edges are. When you feel an edge, get rid of it. That's now a nice continuous curve across the short term. We're now ready to do the bottom of the port, which we'll do from the manifold face.
Let's see if I can get in on that. Yep, that's nice. Much better than that one.
Port's restrained for space, so it ends up being square. That means the corners are quite tight, and that's a little bit too large to deal with the stock corners. So I'm going to use a smaller oval shaped cutter, which costs a princely sum of £1 at a kit car show, and I'm going to use that to shape the port floor. It's important again to get a nice smooth transition from where the gas exits underneath the valve to the manifold face. But I have to work into the corner, so I need the smaller diameter one. It's important to turn the tool at all times to make sure that you're not digging any holes, and to make sure that the right piece of metal is actually being removed. It's very easy to grind or cut in the wrong place. Keep an eye on what you're doing and have a mind for the shape that you're aiming for, and keep feeling with your finger. I'll soon tell you if you're doing it wrong. I've done the corner here of the port. Because the port is essentially square, squaring the corners here stops the gas having to turn quite so rapidly. If it was a round port, you'd have a round entry. As it's square, you really don't want to turn it into a circle too early. Let the exhaust do that, and we'll do it further down.
You can see the difference between the circular port and the much squarer shape we've got there. Okay, good test then. Dave's finger. You need a Dave-sized finger.
You certainly do, or a thumb. There's plenty of area on the port there. That will increase marginally when we use the polishing equipment, just to smooth all the ridges and nasties that the cutters are left in the port. That's about the right size. It's probably a mil too small at the minute. The refinishing equipment will deal with that.
So which finger of mine is the most appropriate one?
You've done that before.
Done that one or two times.
Yeah.
So I think it's the largest finger.
21.5mm valve should pass all the way down the port, and it pretty much does. Whereas here, won't get near it. The real serious stuff now happens on the inlet port, and this is the one that is much more tricky, and there are several involved operations before you can actually finish it. One of which is sleeving this waterway here. As the way the air comes into the head is past this bifurcation down the port, a split, which splits the air between the two valves. It's way too wide, it's totally the wrong shape. The air has to turn to go past it, and it makes a right mess of it. In order to cut that back sufficiently so that it doesn't actually get in the way, we have to break into this waterway, which is bad news. The waterway, however, is completely redundant. It's not actually needed, and it's actually not there on the VVC or motorsport head. So we use some 5mm aluminium bar, which have made specially, to sleeve that hole. Then we can cut away as much of the bifurcation as we like. So I'm just going to go and hack 45mm of 5mm ali bar and drive it into that hole, surrounded by some Loctite. That will then seal the hole and allow us to do what we need to do. We'll go off camera while we do that.
Okay, so we've got this long length of aluminium, which is 5mm in diameter, but you can't buy it like that, so if you need any, Dave's your man.
And the cut's approximately 43mm, 6mm, 5mm bar. if you look at this sectioned head, you can see where the port divides and feeds one of the valves, and it's this central bifurcation that has to be cut away, and you can see the offending waterway here. This 5mm bar, when driven down into the hole, completely seals the waterway, allowing you to cut away as much material as you need to move. The best thing with this bar, although it fits fairly snugly, is to either coat it in Loctite or some sort of epoxy filler. Something like Metal Mend or
Araldite?
JB Weld. Yeah, Araldite will do it. That will withstand a temperature of about 140 degrees C, but all it has to do really is block. It doesn't have to have any tensile strength at all. So I'm going to drive this into that port drilling, and that should allow me to cut as much of that bifurcation away as I need to. Okay. Apply a little Loctite to the end of the bar. Oops. And then put the bar in the hole. And drive it in very gently to see how tight it is. And then drive it in with the appropriate drift, which I have in here somewhere. Would have been prudent for me to get it out first, but there you go.
So how long was that length that you...
42mm.
And that went in nicely.
It did. Okay. Right, we're going to do an inlet port now, and this is a much more involved procedure. We've already sleeved the waterway drilling here with a piece of alley bar. What we're going to do now is to open up the valve throat, and that needs to be around about to 25mm, which is quite a considerable increase in area. It'll end up, when we're finally finished, at about 26mm with a 29.5mm inlet valve. So we have to be very careful that we make this concentric. If we go too wide, the insert will be too thin. So here we go.
You could be doing your best guy, couldn't you?
Again, make sure that the tool is held at the same angle as the valve would be, and then attach. But of course I'm in idiot mode, so I don't have my Joe 90s on. So
Yeah.
I'm asking for trouble. Don't do what I do, always make sure you put your special goggles on. We'll now assess its size, so we make sure we don't go too far. And we do that with a 24mm valve, which happens to be a standard exhaust, nice and easy. Yeah, it's at 24, so let's see if it's at 25. Not quite. So, another small attack to get it to 25. A good assessment of how far you've gone, again, can be had by looking at the width of the valve seat, which is narrowed considerably from the standard one, as you can see. We're not there yet, but we will find out whether we're concentric by taking the 24mm valve that we know will pass through and just having a look at the corona around it, which in fact is wider this side than here, so we need to emphasise this side. The reason that sometimes happens is because the port is narrower here, the cutter hits the aluminium and then doesn't push quite so hard against the valve seat, so you have to keep your eyes peeled for where the alley is being taken out, because that's normally where the steel gets left slightly thick. Give that a go. At 25, because this is a tapered cutter, the insert's going to be wider opened at the top than at the bottom, which is what we want anyway, like a 60-degree cut. We've reached the bottom of the insert and it's almost wide enough for the valve to pass through to the throat, but not quite. So we just need to take a smidgen more off the insert and we can attack the valve throat and guide. Okay, here we go. Joan's just going to now lightly trim to 25mm. That would have done it. Yep, no problem. We're now resting firmly on aluminium all the way around, so that's great. The major restriction now is in the throat and the port itself. And the worst restrictions in the port are twofold. The first is the valve guide and boss, which we're going to remove. And the second bit is the bifurcation, which we'll attack later. There's a really nasty turn,
Let's see if we can get in there.
Lorne will show you, which is hard to see but very easy to feel.
Right, the dodgy turn is...
You can feel the bump.
There's a big bump there,
Yeah,
folks.
that needs to go.
And then
And
all
obviously
that.
the guide and boss needs to go as well, and the short turn is very fat. In the corners here there's an awful lot of airflow being thrown away, so as we cut this corner away we go in here and in here to make sure that the flow over the short turn is better. Because what we're going to do with the port here is to raise the port line, so the shot into the cylinder is more vertical, so we're going semi-downdrafting the head. That improves the flow considerably, especially across this short turn. So the next job is we're going to take out the valve guide and boss. And this is messy and it makes a lot of noise. And the right tool to do that is this circular cutter here. Now one of these I've got is bent and I don't know which one. The way I find out, I'll put it in the cutter. If it vibrates enough to shake my hand to pieces, it's the bent one, and I will mark it as such. It only got bent the other day. Let's find out. I think that's the bent one. I did a little buzz, so I'll try another one. It's no better than this isn't the bent one. Now this is going to be called on to cut steel and also aluminium, so we need to lubricate it or it will clog up really quickly. No, it's the same as the other one, so we can now lubricate it and get on with the job of removing the guide. Now this is tricky, and what we need to do in fact is to have the tool out as far as it will go, so that we don't have the collet of the die grinder hitting the valve area there. That's another reason why you don't cut the seats yet. There's a good possibility that if you do, they'll get damaged. That must be at least 3/8 of an inch into the collet and done up bloody tight. The last thing you want is this thing shedding at 20,000 RPM. We then put on our J90s, get a good grip on the tool, and now we cut for England. Brace the tool because it's going to jump and then hit the guide. Continue moving, don't stop anywhere. Move the tool around, circular motion. Stop, pull the tool out, have a feel. Yes, that's right. Keep going. Into the guide and guide boss, flat with the rest of the port. We will be going a bit further later, but we just want to get the bump out. Now that's about half done. I think a quick shot down the port would be in order so you can see what's happening.
Okay.
Say fat mugs? No, I just said mugs.
So you can see there the material that's been taken away around the valve guide.
It's about half done now. But it's worth stopping very frequently to make sure you don't overdo it or start cutting the side of the port, because that's another job.
Both the same, both got
Babs,
Yes, dear.
you sure you don't want to be on camera?
No, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Right, we're now going to do the valve throat area and the lead into the main part of the port. Now, because we've opened up the valve throat considerably, we now have a small port coming into a large throat. We've got some very nasty edges and steps and nasties. Now, the idea is that that valve throat area needs to end up around about 25.5 to 26 mil. At the moment, it's nowhere near that. So we use our little friend, the general purpose sporting oval tool, which is a chip breaker type, to round this out, a little bit like an egg cup in some ways. The port at the moment, although we've cut the valve guide and boss off, the port line is coming like this, then it's rising up gradually where the valve guide is and then down again and up. And the plan is to get that into a smooth, continuous shape. And because the port line's coming up a bit, we actually have to cut it down by about 2 mil as well, which we'll do from the manifold side of the face.
Alright, just before you do that, just worth mentioning that you can make all these different sizes using your old valves.
Absolutely.
And shoving them in, a drill, spinning a drill and then an angle grinder.
Yeah, put the drill in the vise, put the valve in the chuck of the drill, spin it, get an angle grinder and then just grind away the edge of the valve down to the appropriate size. You'll also need a couple of valves that have had the seats cut away so that you can pop them in when you do the combustion chambers, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, now the idea here is that we open this up so that a 25.5 mil valve will just fit, a rattling good fit, down to the throat and port area. No bigger, 25.5. Okay, so we'll do that now. And we start at the sides here and work our way around. Always keep the valve handy and keep the next smaller size down as well, so that you can assess if you've gone out of round. Okay, now that's a 25, so it would be prudent for me to do it so that a 25 will fit and then move up to a 25.5 rather than try and do it in one hit. And we use this to gradually work around where the tight spots are. work around this central bifurcation, which when you run your finger over it is a large bump. We cut that away. Not too much at the bottom of the throat, but at the side mainly. Allow that to smooth and continuous curve. Whoops. That's better. If you're really worried, you can clamp the head. I'm a lazy bugger. The short turn here can also be modified just a little bit with this cutter here, and we'll round it off a bit. Not too much. We can attack that later. We'll try our 25mm valve, and you can assess where it's catching, because clearly it's large enough that way, but it's at the sides where it's touching. If you rub the valve across, you'll actually make some scratch marks on the part of the throat where it won't fit, so you can attack those. And we can see there's some scratches there, so we'll... Same on the other side. What we're aiming for is a perfectly smooth transition from the port line here to the throat. No bumps, no ridges, nothing. No undulations, just a nice smooth line. Right, the 25mm is getting a bit further down now, so we're getting there. There's still a narrow spot where it comes through this bifurcation, so we'll cut a bit more out of there. At the moment the tool is bouncing around a bit, so I'm going to reset it. Mill valve here. That should be able to pass unheeded right down through the valve throat to the point of about 2/3 of the way down the bifurcation without actually clobbering anything, and it does. And the rest of the port we do from the other side from the manifold face. Template that I've made up to show where the port line should be on a K. It pretty much transposes onto the VVC port line, although it was made before it's in a VVC head. It raises the port line around about 2mm, as you can see. Now that makes the whole of the arrangement into the cylinder semi-downdraft, which is much, much better for flow. All I need now is my stainless steel scribe, and I can scribe where the port line needs to be. It's important that you're central over the studs, and this is sometimes where machining centres and casting centres mean that the manifold hole is not central between the studs. This is a particularly good head. It's quite well done. So we'll scribe the line. You can see there's a fair bit of material to come off the top. And as we look down the port, we can see the effect of removing the guide and boss much more clearly from this side. So we have a nice even port line. If you have a look at the other port where the guide's not been removed, you can get an idea of the difference.
And you can see the mark, the scribe line.
Yeah, indeed.
It's pretty much around there.
Is it recording?
Mm-hmm.
Good, right. The port entry is basically increased to, let me see if I can, 37mm in size, but all of the increases at the top of the port. So effectively you've got another circle offset, about 1mm, 1.5mm upwards, and that raises the port line considerably. We've marked one on here with a scribe and a felt tip, and that's the line that we'll be working to. From that line, we're making continuous port drop down to where the valve guide and boss area is. Put the head in the correct position. And then I'm going to get my Big Bertha porting tool out, which removes it. You can do it quite adequately with this oval tool, but it's just considerably faster with this big 4th road bridge type one that I have. That I prepared earlier, which I have here. This is a nice big tool, and does the job a lot more quickly. It just needs taking off it. And this is a long job, so I'm going to sit for this one. Get the head at the appropriate angle, and then we'll cut to this line. There's always the danger with the inlet port that you can hit a waterway if you go too wide, but if you're careful you won't do that. The only other place you could break into is the tap at the end of the tappet bore here. Now that's not necessarily a disaster because the maximum pressure drop is only about 14.5 psi between here, if this could create a vacuum, which it can't, and the outside word, which is the end of the tappet bore. So you could seal that with epoxy. It's much better just to be careful and not do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Always be careful, you can always take more metal off, but you can't easily put more metal back on, so... A little bit at a time until you're exactly on the line, which we are now. And that's as much as we want to do with the entry itself. Now what we have effectively is a nice big area at the valve, a great hump in the middle, and then a cutback here. So we've got a great area of aluminium that needs to go here to keep the top of the port flat.
Let's have a feel before you do.
Yeah, you can feel there's a great big, you come in at this bevel and there's a great big bump.
There's a bump
yeah,
halfway down.
Which we'd expect because we've cut this away. We've cut this away but we haven't cut the middle away. So we need to get at that and make that a straight line. So in goes our cutter. Keep checking with your finger. If necessary, look away from what you're doing because your eyes can deceive you. Because of the reflections, you can get a bad idea of how the port line is. Don't look, just feel. And then you can feel where the nasties are. And there are some just up here, so they can go. First, your technique isn't going to be very confident, but as you get an idea of exactly where the material is that you're removing, you can move with a great deal more confidence. Keep the tool moving at all times. Again, you can use a valve here to determine exactly how large the passageway is. At the moment, at the point of the bifurcation, it's only 24 mil, so it needs to be wider. So the side of this bifurcation has been cut up to a point, but it needs more removing. So we'll get this cutter in and remove it.
So we are getting close.
About 2/3 done. There's an area here which is still high, which you can't really see, but you can feel with your finger, and that needs opening up a bit. And there's this side here wants a bit of tailoring where the cup shape of the valve throat is still not a smooth transition through to the port, but it will be.
Feel in there?
It will. Yeah, you can see that's much better than the other side, where it ramps up quickly. There's quite a substantial amount of port area there. Now at this point, if you're confident in using the cutters, you can continue doing this with a cutter. If you're not, then you can use some polishing drums. I'm confident with a cutter, I'm going to get it 90% of the way there.
And the valve size that you're trying to, that you're using to get your size is that 24 mil?
24 or 25 mil. At the end of it, you want a 25 mil valve to be able to pass all the way through.
Right.
So I think this is a 25.5, which is marginally too big. So we'll just remove a bit more. As you can see, you don't achieve a round port shape, you get like a wobbly square shape. So there's quite a bit of material to remove off the short turn as well, which will mean that that valve will pass through. At the moment we're just doing the bottom. Hold on a second. Right, what we're going to do now is the short turn of the inlet port here. It's pretty important to get the bottoms of these squared off. There's an awful lot of flow across the bifurcation in this short turn. That's where the point of highest air velocity was in the port. So I'm going to remove quite a bit of material here so that the air gets a good shot straight into the cylinder. And you can actually see the top of the port quite clearly. There's an awful lot of airflow here, and we don't want that disrupting it. So that's going to be reshaped, smoothed, and the corner made square with the correct tool. I'm using a small oval cutter because it's just the right shape and size to get into the corners. Just unravel it from Lorne's lights. And we'll now get this shape right. Quite a bit of material gets removed here to square this off and make a continuous curve.
Right, so this area here is being squared off and cutting into that corner there.
And this short, tight radius corner is made into a longer radius and blended into the valve C insert, which I'm just about to do. So the floor of the port becomes a continuous curve rather than coming along straight and then suddenly turning.
Okay.
That's now a nice continuous curve from one part of the port to the other. No sharp turns, no sharp edges. The port area is about right. 24mm valve passes unhindered. We'll now do the floor of the inlet port. We've done most of the work on the short turn from where the valve is, and it's just a matter of getting the corners as smooth as we can. And then sharp turn. We haven't actually increased the height of it or the depth of the port at this point. We're keeping it as it was, so it's just about making a smooth transition into the short turn. And cleaning up this bifurcation here, squaring off the inside corner. We can then use the polishing equipment to smooth everything. Have to be a bit careful here on the sealing of the port, because just behind here is the tappet bore. But if you do get a bit thin here, it's not the end of the world. The inlet port's actually quite well looked after in terms of cooling, and the only pressure inside it is the negative vacuum that you get inside the port, whereas on the exhaust side you've got water one side of it at 14 or 15 psi that's quite hot, and you've got exhaust gases at like 220 psi or higher hammering away at the port all the time, so you have to be much more careful on the exhaust pot. On the inlet you could probably get away with a port wall thickness of, I don't know, 20 or 30 thou, and it still would be okay. I don't intend to make it that thin, but if you do make a mistake, it's not necessarily a disaster. But the important thing here is that the transition from this port line up to the guide is entirely smooth. There are no lumps or bumps, and this is very close to what we need it to be. Just needs a small bit of fettling around the guide area. And the real thin part is just here, just as it enters the head. That's the end of the guide, at the end of the tappet bore, and you can see inside here there's a little bump. And you can estimate the thickness by using your fingers, and there's still a fair bit of material there, probably 80 thou, so nothing to worry about. I'll just give this a little finish off and then we'll get the polishing equipment out and finish it. Vital piece of equipment when you're doing a head, and that's a rubber dolly. These take wound cloth woven spiral bands with abrasive grit on them. These are absolutely ideal for all sorts of general porting work. They're rubber, so they give a fair bit. They're replaceable caps. They're not particularly expensive. They do them in all sorts of grits. I've got some very fine ones here for refinishing. But they also do coarse ones, cubic zirconium, for really removing metal. That's for refinishing. That's the main size I use is, I think, 30 by 15, and that's for general porting work and smoothing. Yeah, 30 by 15. And I've got a second size here, which I think is 25 by 10, and that's for smaller work. So what we're going to do now is go in the port here and generally clean and tidy it up with a medium type grit, which is large, what I call fine. Now these are designed to be spun at around about 25,000 RPM, and at that point the rubber expands and grips the spiral band. At lower RPM, which is what I use here, they don't expand, so the dolly spiral band just pushes off. So I just use a bit of old glue, any piece of paper, tissue or whatever to make it a little bit tighter. The other thing to do is to leave a small overlap at the end, because if you're doing a curved surface, that can be persuaded around the curve. It will distort and give a nice finish around the end. So we start in the port where there are cutting marks left by the cutter, and we First of all, get rid of all the slag that's in there, like so. Mind your eyes at this point. We'll whip back. Tools, always keep the thing moving. Again, your finger is your best weapon here, but also as you refinish, it gives a nice satin finish to the surface of the port. And if there are any digs or tucks, you'll be able to spot them really easily because they won't have that finish. You'll see a big shiny chip. Shape and port line to another as smoothly as possible. If you've got any dips or nasty turns, you'll be able to feel them with your finger, and you want to do your best to eradicate them. Especially where the straight port line meets the valve throat, that needs to be smooth, that needs to be a nice smooth transition. The port doesn't have to be polished, it just has to have a satin finish. That's the roof of the port done, and now we're going to attack the valve throat and the transition area between the roof. Attack the valve throat and basically get it round and smooth to the correct size and blend it into the port. Again, polishing dolly, little overhang so you can get the curve done, and then just work that sucker to death. A nice smooth transition now from the top of the port. There's a little bit of a bump there that we can get rid of. Again, always keep it moving so you don't do any digs or tucks, and your fingers will tell you when it's about right. There's still a little bit to go there. And we're probably pretty close to being able to get the 25.5 one down. The 25 one is certainly okay. 25.5 should go almost all the way down, and indeed it does, so that's about the right sort of size. Now we'll do the short turn where we've cut away the square. Get the dolly. This is why these are a good idea with a nice long extension on them, so you can really get into where the work's needed. And roll it around like this to get that curve right. Now, if I was doing this for real, I'd be a lot more careful with the size here, because it's clearly not as large as it needs to be. When I've cut the seat, it's going to be very wide, so the seat trimming you leave till last, but I'm just doing this as an indication. And then there's a nice smooth, uninterrupted line from the manifold face up to the back of the valve. We're going to do the floor of the port. This bottom piece here. Again, not trusty rubber dolly. Have to be careful to keep it moving at all times, or you start digging holes. One finger, that tells you when things are right, or if you've got the shape wrong. All in all, that's a nice smooth transition. And like I said, there's a bit of a bump halfway around that turn, which I'll get from the other side. Get some of it this way. The back is gone now, so that's got it. And the corner of the bifurcation. And that's more or less done, that inlet port now. I dare say.
Close-up looks.
Yeah. In fact, let's put it up like so. There's a good view down the inlet port now. Back to the stand. Yeah. A bit tighter for space than the inlet port, so it's a bit harder work. Quite a lot more work required around these valve seat areas when we finally cut the seats, but for now we'll just get a smooth line. Got the valve throat area fairly clean and tidy. We're now pay some attention to the port itself, and the manifold face. Again, smoothness of line, transitions. Bear in mind you don't want to remove too much material here, because that's where it's thin. We don't want to break through. The lights resting over there.
So you're not actually enlarging the exhaust ports?
They've been enlarged with the cutters. At the moment I'm just smoothing the line. Most of the material that's going to be removed is already gone. I'm going to take about half a mil out. The port exit's not too bad, it's slightly undersized, but we're gathering some air at the top of the port here and the bottom of the port there. That's top and bottom when the head's installed.
But there's no template required for that?
Well, strictly speaking, you ought to have a template. However, the exhaust manifold is much larger than the exhaust port anyway, so you get a step which actually aids counteracting reversion, where the exhaust starts going up the inlet and what have you, so you have quite a step there anyway. So unless you're going to match it to the exhaust manifold, I mean, the shape provided is about right and the area is about right, it's not going to be too bad. It's less critical than the inlet side. You can see where the manifold ring is. And the manifold flange and exhaust pipe diameter is much larger than the exit of the port, so I generally just measure and do it by eye. But if you want to make a template, no harm in that. The reason for the template on the inlet side is because you're raising the port a substantial amount and you want it to still line up with the throttle bodies and what have you, so it's important to get it right.
Exhaust port partly finished. I've still got the top to do there.
I'm going to do the short turn of the exhaust port. It's quite small on a stock K head, even with 26mm valves, so it may be I need to use the smaller dolly, but I'm going to give this a go and see if it gets in there. Yeah, that feels okay. And then we finish off the short turn and then the bottom of the port as installed in the car from the port side. So, and we go into here and finish off. The corners here are very sharp because it's more or less a square port and this is too large to do them, so. So we'll do the larger areas and then we'll put a smaller dolly in. And use a new spiral band. lacquered spiral band on it.
Where would I go about buying one of those?
You can get them from all sorts of engineering suppliers. I've got a catalogue upstairs with a national distribution chain who do carbide burrs, polishing equipment. I can just pick out the bits in the catalogue. It costs a little bit of money, but it's worth it. If you look at the cost of actually having a head ported professionally, it's very little to pay really.
Would somebody like Burton's?
No, you need engineering supplies really.
Yeah.
Because they're in the business of producing their own heads, it's highly unlikely they'll want to encourage you to do yours. So we've got a nice smaller diameter one and we'll have a go.
So you can see the difference between the two valves.
I've got to the stage now, right, where I really want to get somebody else in.
Look at Dave talking to his neighbour in the background.
We're doing a good job, boss. Keep up the good work.
Yeah.
You come and do ours after.
He says he's fed up with it now, he wants someone else to do it, so when you're ready, Babs.
Yeah. I put some combing up this morning and I went up to lunch and came back and looked at it.
It's all wrong.
Oh dear.
These things happen, mate. These things happen.
So we have the valve seat cutter.
Yep. What we're going to do now is use a valve seat cutter to modify the shape of the combustion chamber to clear the valves, because they're actually larger than the ones that are normally fitted. The valves will collide with the side of the combustion chamber. We don't want that. That is not good. So let me just check that this is the correct size before I go screwing. I think so. And then we use this to induce a 45-degree chamfer from the corner of the combustion chamber. Well, we would do if it was large enough, which isn't. And that's the ideal shape for, well, pretty close to the ideal shape for following the valve. So put the required size cutter on. And when this is done, we're going to cut the seat with a proper seat cutter. And once that's done, we can then trim the seat from the inside to make an exact seat width and seat profile, which has only been guessed at so far. So we use this crappy old cutter. We can't use the proper seat cutters because they don't have a continuous blade. They have spot blades, which means they'll just jam up. So we use this to chew away at the aluminium. It looks a fairly grotty finish on it, but then after we've finished, we use a polishing dolly to blend the side of the combustion chamber. This unshrouds the valve and gets all the material out of the way, the airflow, and you end up with the correct shaped combustion chamber. You can see that's cut away the corner of the combustion chamber nicely. Obviously this is going to require blending in because there's a nasty edge. That's almost done enough. It just wants another push over in that direction with a good chew. Now we have to do the same for the exhaust valve. Obviously you have to do that for all the combustion chambers and each valve. It's now so tight I can't get the bloody thing undone. We'll use a marginally smaller cutter on the exhaust side. Maybe even a couple of these. Because we only want to cut away the wall of the combustion chamber where we have to, because it will both lower the compression and bring the wall out near the gasket line, which is not really what we want. here's the valves that are actually going to go in the head. A 26mm exhaust, Paul Ivy, 21.4N, tough-trided. 29.5mm inlet valve, wasted stem, tough-trided stainless steel valve. They now fit, and I just have to cut the seats. They clear the combustion chambers, so the next step on this particular one is to just cut the seat, which I'm going to do. Here we use the proper seat cutters, which are Waterway side split Waterways, 60-degree cutter, 45-degree cutter, and a 30-degree cutter. I'm just going to be using 45-degree cutter for now, and the 6mm mandrel. It should be. Oh, that's it. Okay. The cutter has to be set to the correct width. It shouldn't be too difficult. Not too wide at the minute. These are carbide blades which last for quite a while. And they give a precision seat. If it's done properly, very little valve lapping is needed, which I like the sound of.
It's a job that I don't like.
First thing is to make sure that the pilot actually fits the guide. There's no crap in the guide. And then the pilot's tightened up. It's an expanding pilot. The more you tighten it, the more it grips the valve guide. That way you can be sure that it's pretty much concentric. And then you get an accurate seat.
This is quite a specialised job. Unless you've got the proper tools, you're
Absolutely.
pretty much in the hands of an engine shop.
You are. It's important to remember that generally our seat cutting equipment isn't the sort of thing you have lying around. So, and as you say, it's a specialised job.
You have to have your animal to keep charge of things to make sure that the work's proceeding properly.
Right. And that's got its drawers in a twist, so we have to undo that now. Tricky little sockets to work with, at the best of times. And this at the moment is not the best of times, so it's important that the expanding part of the mandrel exactly fits the valve guide, or you get some dreadful distortion and poor alignment. So we'll try that again.
If you were instructing an engine builder to do your seats, what would you have to tell them to do? What details would you need to give them?
60-degree cut, 45-degree cut, 30-degree cut, although the 30-degree cut is going to be difficult because there is no edge of the insert to put the 30-degree cut on, since the inserts are now only just big enough for the valves. You probably have to make do with only a 60-degree cut and not a 30-degree one. Still having some difficulty on this one. To be honest, I don't know why, so I should just go in and tighten that. If you're going to instruct an engineering workshop to do this, you need to let them know that the seat needs to be cut out right to the edge of the insert, because it's at the edge of the insert that the valve fits. The insert and the valve end up almost exactly the same size, at about 29.5mm. So it's important that the seat is cut as wide as the insert will allow, which is what I'm doing at the moment. a fair bit to take out. And the seat will cut surprisingly wide, even though we've opened up the valve throat. And once the seat is there and true, then we then trim it from the inside to make it a uniform width. The width being about 1.2 to 1.4 mil. And with the valve throat area going from the seat into a 60-degree cut or a radius down to about a mil smaller. So the profile of the seat is a continuous curve, or as close as you can get to a continuous curve. It's getting closer, there's still a fair bit to go yet, and you can see, if you look carefully, that there's a brake line between the seat and the combustion chamber space, which shows there's still a recess in there, and we're not actually out to width of the insert yet, so there's a little bit to go. It's very near now. Right out to the extent of the insert. So it's about right. As you can see, the insert needs some trimming because the seat's wider in some places than others, which is to be expected. We can correct that fairly quickly with a small carbide cutter and then a polishing dolly, which we'll do in a moment. We'll just give it another light dressing and it'll be ready, as will our bacon sandwiches.
Go ahead.
Okay, both the inlet and exhaust seats have now been cut, and that's left me with a good idea of where the seats need to be thinned, because they won't be exactly concentric, the holes, and you can tell by the width of the seat where they need trimming. The seats have been cut right out to the edge of the insert, and they're a little bit fat on this side and here. Now normally what I'd do is to lap the valve for 30 or 40 seconds just to grey up the seat so I can find out what needs trimming, but I can actually tell by eye that it's too fat here and too fat there, so I can trim that with a carbide cutter, or I can use a 60-degree cutter in the valve seat kit like this. I think I prefer to do it by hand. These are great on big valve seats, but on the smaller ones you can overdo it and then end up with no seat. So I'll put the die grinder on slow, use a 60-degree cutter and trim the seats that way. It'll take a minute. For them. And they're top quality. And we just trim the inside of the seat, don't stop it fast, do it on slow speed. And that gives us our 60-degree lead into the seat. When you're doing this, it's always difficult to see this part of the seat, so we trim that with the head up the other way. Now it looks time consuming, but generally you do all the seats together, so I'd go along and do all of them, then to turn the head up the other way, and do the bottom of the seat here, which is way too fat. Trim it. We now have a nice 60-degree lead into the seat. We can then finish that off with a small spiral band, or we could use a Dremel for that matter, anything would do it nicely. Lead it into the seat, like so, and that takes the 60-degree lead in and turns it into a radius, which is pretty much ideal. Note the angle that you do it with. Okay, that's nice. Then we'll do the other side of the seat, there. Okay, now we're going to do some work on the combustion chamber, because that needs refacing, because the valves are actually quite deeply recessed.
Let's have a quick look at the finished product.
It's not quite finished, it won't be finished until we've lapped the valves, and then we'll thin the seat just a touch more. But you can see this is far removed from the original exhaust port in terms of area, and the same on the inlet side. I just tilt the head and you can see the inlet's radically different than the old.
Yeah, certainly a difference there. So there we have it, one turned down a valve.
Don't do this at home. I'm hoping that's going to be about the right size. So we'll protect the seat, but not prevent me removing material from the combustion chamber. Almost, just a touch more, that'll be it.
Okay.
There's two things that need doing to the chamber. The most important one is to get rid of the seat recession, where the insert is actually recessed in the combustion chamber, because that means you don't get any airflow until the valve is lifted about 1/2 mil or so. The other thing to do is to make sure that this particular opening up here is actually lined up nicely with the side of the combustion chamber, so you haven't got any nasty edges. I just burnt my pinky on the valve.
Ouch.
So, I think the first thing that we're going to do is put the thing on its side, like so, and just have a... no, we won't do it that way, looking at it, we can do it perfectly well this way. And by using a small ball-shaped cutter at quite a slow speed, we can reface those areas of the combustion chamber that we need to. It may be we have to put this ball cutter in the field if the die grind is spinning a bit too quickly, because when it warms up it tends to speed up. So we'll give it a go and see how we do. The idea is to get a nice smooth line. Now these tend to kick a bit, and if they do, they'll kick out of the combustion chamber and they could make a mark on your head. So you must make sure you're gripping them properly. Good. The idea is that all around the valve you want to smooth down like this, with that nice rounded area. You don't need to move much material there, it's just around the rim of the valve. Take it down to about the level of the insert. Get rid of the knobbly bit on there. Knobbly bit's a technical term. You've got to have a real steady hand for this. If you haven't got a steady hand, do it in a drill at a much slower speed. What the valve should do is just protect the seat area. It shouldn't stop you removing the material. So let you bleed down the combustion chamber face, right down to the level of the valve insert. This is the object of this exercise. Again, if you're not confident, put the thing in the drill or get a Dremel with a smaller tool and do it that way. And that's a nice clear passage around there. And this is now cut right back to the edge of the valve seat insert. And then we refinish it with a polishing doodah. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on the exhaust side. I pop the valve, you can see that that's cut away almost exactly down to the level of the valve seat insert. This area here is a dead area of the combustion chamber. Don't touch it. I've used some American polishing pads here because they're marginally smaller than the dolly. They have to be pushed on really hard. But I've left them overlapping by about 1/4 of an inch. This allows them to distort. And I can get into the corner of the combustion chamber here and blend that in. So, and it makes a decent fish of it. It doesn't have to be perfect, you just want to get rid of ridges and edges. And that's done a reasonable job of blending in the side of the combustion chamber and around the back here, giving clearance around the valve for airflow, and then we use it flat to do these bits. You can see how useful the extension is at this point. And the ideal way to do this is to put 2 blanks, do the whole of the combustion chamber, and you can rub across the surface with one of these. And that gives you a pretty good finish, as well as getting the shape right.
Okay,
Yep.
so there you have it. So you more or less leave these bits alone because that bit's a dead
that's
area.
dead.
Take it around there and smooth that in.
Bring that down to the level of the insert, which is about 1/2 mil. Same on the exhaust side. Tuck these corners in so that they blend nicely with the side of the combustion chamber and around here, so there's no lip. And then you just have an initial lap of the valves to find out how wide the seat is, and then trim it from the inside and polish it with a polishing drum. And there you have it.
Voila.
That's 2 ports done.
Okay.
Now we'll bung on a finish cylinder head so you can have a quick look over it, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So this is Simon Parker's head.
Yep. Done to the same
Same at
spec. 26 mil, as you can see. Little tiny bits to be trimmed off the seats, which I'm about to do. And that throat's done. Exhaust port's done. 22 mil, trimmed, all ready to go. Combustion chamber's done. Exhaust manifold face has been planished, but there's the port line, as you can see. Inlet ports, yep.
Exhaust ports.
Inlet says that on the...
Are they? They're still on the inlet.
No, we just did the exhaust, these are the inlets.
Alright.
And they're far and away removed from the standard port, that's for sure.
Mm. What was that? Something's just fallen on the floor.
That's it, wreck the joint. A very expensive carbide cutter, don't worry about.
Okay. Through to the alley rod that we put in earlier on, but it's nice and smooth across there, no problem. Right,
Not too hard or the collets will fly out. Just enough to crack them. Whoops, there you go. There's one that was just touched a tad too hard. And out they came. So that's what happens if you hit them too hard, but that's why you use a socket incidentally, so that if the collets do pop out, they go in there.
yep.
So we'll just have to find the collet before it goes walkabout. Oh yes, it's down there in the head, so that's no problem. So, You want them in here to your
Yep.
shovel? I don't think it's a good idea.
Nope.
Nope. I think you should put them in something separate.
Okay.
The collets are uniform, so it doesn't matter about, as long as they're not damaged. Doesn't matter which valve you use them on. A lot of people number them and keep them in little bags. Unless they're different between inlet and exhaust, which they're not on this head. Does that matter?
Okay. Makes it look very easy having a valve spring compressor
Yes.
and also something to put the head on.
Yep.
Makes a lot of difference.
Oh yes.
And that magnetic screwdriver is a lifesaver.
It is. When you're putting it back in, what you need is a small screwdriver and some grease. And then the grease will allow, not a magnetic screwdriver, because if you, the magnet will
Yeah,
just pull it straight off again.
yeah.
And you know what they say about pulling it off. So you just use a regular screwdriver and enough grease to get the collet to stick. And then in you go.
Excellent.
Bottom platform of the oil seal, and just push, and it pops off, like so. If you're clever, you can, and you've got a magnetic screwdriver, like I haven't, you can then pull them out. Where did the big screwdriver go? You need a big F-off magnetic screwdriver for this. Nab them like so, and out they come. These are actually in fairly good condition, so you can actually keep them if you want to, or sling them. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with them.
Yeah.
They've got a very low mileage by the look of it. There's another one in there somewhere.
And when you put them back on, is it just a case of a combination of putting the valve in
Well,
and pushing?
the best thing to do is get a very small screwdriver to pilot it in, and push it down the screwdriver stem, and when it's nestling on the top, get a socket of the appropriate size with a 5-inch extension and just push it down, and then they nestle in there without any problem. So it's a bit more involved putting them on than taking them off, so it was said to the bishop.
Yep.
But it's still a straightforward-ish job. So,
Okie dokie.
right, one important thing to do, because the cooling on the K is marginal, is to make sure that the waterways here at the side of the exhaust ports have got all the flashing removed and are rounded off, because that improves the water flow through the head considerably. As cast and as machined, when they come out of the factory, these holes are only about half the size they need to be. You can see the size they need to be by the casting lines. Just get yourself a small carbide cutter or simmer or even a file and just open them up so that all these edges are rounded. If you come close, you can see that these have been opened up correctly. There's a nice big hole there. Same on the inlet side, so that water can flow nice and easily around. Because anything you can do to assist the water flow through the head has got to be a good idea.
Right.
Okay.
Let's compare that with the originals.
If we look at the original one, you can see just how bloody awful they are.
Yeah.
As they come out of the factory, they've got these great big bits of casting in the way, look. Compare that to this one. You can see the difference between that and this thing here.
Yep.
There's about 50% more area. Same casting. Okay. Also, there's a large water entry here that's got a sharp edge on it. It's worth taking that edge off.
Yep.
Here, to improve water flow. And then on the top of the head, underneath here, oh, you'll have to stop for a second while I get...
Sing one, you sing one. Oh, he's behind you.
I'm still on the phone, sorry. You're not capturing
I'm
my
just looking
wife
for a
immortality.
larger one of those.
Not with
Right.
my,
I found the other battery, so back in
Oh,
business.
top man.
caught me in my day in head and the glasses.
Well, Baz is always after one that's a bit larger. So you're in good company there. Right, I just need to measure this little sucker.
Right. Here you have the oil ways, which are filled up with araldite or epoxy resin, because they are used for the hydraulic followers, which when converting to solid you no longer require. So that is assuming that you are converting your followers to solid. You just put some epoxy resin in there, there, and that sorts out your followers. So Dave tells me. Right, how do you modify your followers? Well, when you pull a follower out, it looks something like this, and the hydraulic part is in there. Now what you do to separate the hydraulic part is to give it a sharp bash down on the table. Now, this one's been done, so the hydraulic part falls out, but what you actually do, well, you don't actually give it a bash on the table because you'll ruin your table, but you find a hard surface and you literally go like that, and if you do it hard enough, eventually this will come out. What you've got here is inside there there is a circlip. Here's the circlip which retains it in the follower. So you eventually loosen that up by whacking this thing hard and as square as you can when you whack it. That'll eventually come out, and you'll find there's a spring in there as well, so that they come out. They're discarded when you're converted to solid followers. And then what you do, and you can just about see this, and I'll just pause for a second while I adjust the... that's better actually if I put it in the light like that. You drill 4 holes to enable the oil to drain away. So distributed evenly around there. You'll find that there's an oil hole in the groove which is there. Very difficult to see actually. What you do is you fill that with either soldering it or using an epoxy resin or some kind of adhesive that will withstand fairly high temperatures. Epoxy resin should do the trick, but make sure of course that it's not splattered over this edge. Okay, and then you also, which I haven't done as yet, need to, by circular movements like so, give this surface a light sanding with 600 emery paper or something like that, so that the follower can be reused, because you can probably see that it's worn slightly on the surface, so you want to flatten that out. You reuse this part, and there's your tappet, which will go in there like that, and then that'll go in there, and basically when you're setting your gaps, which I believe are 8 thou and 10 thou, 10 thou I think for exhaust and 8 thou for inlet, but you'll need to check that. You grind down the surface of this to get your gaps right, and that fits in there, and that's your solid follower conversion. Well, approximately 2 to 3 weeks later, and about 35 hours or thereabouts, between 30 and 35 hours of hard labour, I've finished my cylinder head. So what did I use? Well, I haven't got Dave's sophistication, so I just stuck the simple drill, not a high-speed drill. It's got 2 settings, but it doesn't seem to work on 2 settings, so it's just 1 speed. In terms of tools, I used the grinders that Dave provided me with, and some that I had of my own. Now, these are essential tools. This kind of grinder is absolutely essential, because anything else just hasn't got the oomph to get through the aluminium. So I used some of those. The polishing tools that Dave suggested, which again were essential. I found that these types worked a lot better than anything that I had. This extension tool for the drill, again essential to avoid what I've actually managed to do on the top of the head, which I'll show you in a minute. And using my old valves, I grinded out different sizes to go with inside the head to protect the valve seats as best as I could. Not very successfully, I have to add, and I'm hoping that Dave will be able to rescue my seats when I go and have them grinded, but they at least helped. And then I've got my different sizes of valves, which basically were a 26, a 25, a 24.5, a 22 and a 21.5. This piece of kit is essential for getting your valve sizes right. I put these in the in the drill and shove them on a bench grinder to try and get them down to size. Right, well, this is the finished product. Now, as I said, you can see the top of this head is in a little bit of a bad way, but I'm going to take that and have it skimmed, so that won't be a problem. And the actual actual combustion chamber areas. In this strong light it tends to show up the bumps of these, but I can assure you that it is fairly smooth and it should be okay. Dave will tell me tomorrow. Taking material away from here and here and around there. You can hear the cat in the background. You always have to have a cat in these videos, don't you? Around here and here, and just smoothing the whole thing off. Not taking the whole of the bumper of that out. Not removing much material from there and there, because that's, as Dave said, dead area. And not forgetting the rods that fill in these on the inlet side. I think they're waterways, which are not required. There may be oilways, but I'm sure they're waterways actually. And using a bit of epoxy resin, I use some what is it called, real steel or something. I checked the temperature to make sure that it could cope with 100 degrees for at least some time. And it did, so I've used that to seal those in. I've also cut these holes out and removed the material that was left from the bad casting. Okay, this is the inlet side. The inlet from a different angle, and here are the exhaust ports. And when you get the light right, they look quite good. Exhaust ports again. Apologise for the music, by the way. Here's where the valve comes through the top. And you can see where I've used the epoxy resin to block off those oilways. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I can count. One for each follower. So, it's to Dave's to find out what he thinks of my handiwork. But first, let's just have a comparison of the camshafts and see what they look like. And that is the 740 profile versus standard profile. The new ones are on the right and the old ones on the left. Now it's difficult to tell, I know, but the one on the right you can see when it's not blurred that there is in fact a difference. It is high lift and also slightly longer duration by the looks of it, although the video camera's not been very kind to me at this present time in demonstrating that. I think that's the best you're going to get. Another thing that I did was to try and match the head to the exhaust manifold, and I've also smoothed the exhaust manifold entry points down a bit to get rid of all the bits of metal that were left over from the welding. I used a template like this, so just made up, matched against this to try and match the exhaust ports to that, so it's a nice and smooth transition. And the same thing for the throttle bodies, which need rather more work. Actually, you can actually bolt them to the head and then scribe round through the valves, through the valve port holes, and a mark around here, which you can then grind down to and then blend all this in, so that's a nice smooth transition. So I've done that about an inch in to these throttle bodies. Let's see if we can get inside there. Have another go. Oh, yes. I have to take a fair amount of material out of there to give a nice smooth line for the flow. And a fair amount of material came off of one face. I think it came off this edge, most of the material came off. This is my exhaust manifold.
Looks like you've attacked it with a road drill here, Lord. No, just a little bit over the top around the combustion chambers. It's not actually going to hurt, it'll just lower the compression at a tad, and you lose a bit of squish here, which is not going to hurt it too much. The ports are about the right size, but there's a problem where the straight part of the port meets the valve throat here. There's a lump. It's difficult to actually spot that when you've not done a few, but there's a change here and the transition that needs sorting out. I was just going to send the air bouncing off the back of the valve instead of around it. So all of them are much the same. I think it's just in the technique of coming in from here and then from here and then not getting the bit where they meet, which is sort of there-ish, or in the bifurcation there's some lumps and bumps around where the valve guides were. Throats are quite big. They should only be 25.5 to 26. That's a 26mm valve, and they're bigger than that, but they are finished, whereas I would have rough cut them to about 25.5 and then polished them out to about this size. I've cut a seat here, that seems to have cut up okay, but the insert is straight-sided, there's no opportunity for a curve and a radius, but that'll be okay. And then the 26mm valve goes down a fair way, which means it just stops short here, which is where I plan to remove some metal anyway. The exhaust throats look about the right size, but I know you had some fun with one of those. The 22mm valve fits down a treat, so there are one or two that are undersized. That one's undersized, and that one is. That one isn't. That one's slightly undersized. That one's slightly undersized. So, as is that one. And that one. So they just want a bit of blending out on the bifurcation, probably. And the short turns want squaring a bit. And the short turns on here want a bit of curve putting on them too, because they really have been hacked out quite a lot. So we want to get a nice curve on here, or the air's just not going to go around it. So we'll do that after we've cut the seats. So the first seat's cut up alright. This one looks like the worst one on the head, so I'm going to cut that one next to see how it comes up. The problem now is because the guide is so short, the expanding mandrel that normally has to be kept entirely within the guide can't be, because the guide is actually shorter than the mandrel, which is a pain. So just have to be extremely careful how we do it up, or it becomes damaged, like this one, which got broken by somebody heavy-handed, not me. So, and they are not just expensive, but a bastard to get hold of as well, so maybe extremely careful doing them up. Now we're going to cut the seat. These are carbide cutters, so pretty hard. We're guaranteed if the mandrel's fitted correctly, you get a nice accurate seat. It doesn't need much lapping in.
So what's the angle you're doing on that one?
Yeah, that's a 45, which is cutting the seat. when that's done, we might well use the 60-degree cutter to trim it, or I might do it by hand. It depends on how much material there is. If it's entirely concentric, I'll do it with a cutter. If it's not, I'll do it by hand, because the cutter will just get pushed over to one side and it'll destroy your valve seat. So.
Probably not going to be concentric.
Probably not, but it's not the end of the world. You can't tell if it's concentric until you've cut the seat. And then the width of the seat tells you when you're right and when you're wrong. I mean, this one, there's quite a fat seat that side, about 2 mil, and a 1.2 mil seat the other side, so that's a little bit off. Look. Well, the seat's actually cutting up okay. Again, the insert is thinner than I would leave it, and because it's straight-sided, it's only really got about 1 mil and a bit either side, which is just a little on the narrow side. But they'll probably be okay. We'll just cut that seat.
What's likely to happen if they're not? That would
I'd
be
say if it was on the
essential.
exhaust side, the seat might move, because it's subject to a lot of heating, cooling. But on the inlet side, it's probably not going to. It's probably going to be okay. But if you go too thin, then the metal just doesn't have sufficient strength to hold itself in. It collapses. The insert moves, bang, goodbye engine. So it's fairly catastrophic failure mode. The insert moves, that means the valve's held open, the valve hits the piston decides doesn't like it, and then you have a nice big bang on your hands, which is obviously expensive and not more than a little bit annoying.
Yeah.
All the seats have been cut. I've just lapped in an exhaust valve, and the valve seats are actually quite thin, so it's made a pretty much perfect seat on the valve, and it's also left an area which is unlapped, which is basically excessive seat. Now we can trim that with one of these in the die grinder, or we can use a 60-degree cutter like this just to trim away. You have to be really careful you don't overdo it. So we're going to sing the trim away song, put the expanding mandrel in, and then trim the seat. So that's a job for Lorne,
Super.
because I'm a lazy git. So here you go, Lorne, if you want to make that up,
Okay.
and I'll show you how it's done.
So I've attempted to lap in the valve, and then once that's done, we're putting a 60-degree angle on the inside. We're doing it by hand using a special size cutter because there's not really enough material to risk using the 60-degree cutter that we were using earlier on. So Dave's doing it carefully by hand.
Making a nice radius into the seat here rather than 60-degree cut, which is slightly better. Gives a better finish to the seat as well. Using a trusty Dremel with some jiffy caps. They're brilliant. You just get a rubber dolly, beware. Plonk these on. Quick change.
Where would you actually buy those?
Molleroda polishing. You can get them from any polishing system supply. I found them on the web. They sent me a catalogue and they're reasonably priced.
What's the name again? Molleroda?
Molleroda, yeah.
Okay, now I've lapped in the inlet valves. I'm just putting a radius around the edge to try and smooth the curves in right up to the lapping. There's not enough of an edge on my head to enable a proper curve to be put on, but we're just smoothing it in nicely around the edge.
Taking the edge off the seat. It leaves quite a nasty sharp edge, and there's not enough room for the 60-degree cut like Lorne said, so we'll just take the nasty edge off it, which will help low lift flow a bit.
Okay, just got the head back a couple of days ago from having it skimmed. Had the 20th thou taken off of it, and I spent yesterday evening polishing it. Now you don't need to polish it. It needs to be a reasonably silky matte surface, but that's all that's sufficient. But there are certain areas of the head that perhaps can benefit from a bit of a polishing, and the important areas are immediately around this kind of area. So actually polishing it can bring some benefit, but not an awful lot. Engine builders tend to polish more from the presentation point of view. If it looks nice, then the perception is that it will go well. If it looks nice and sexy, also they'll sell more probably. But I thought, after all this work, a couple of hours making it look nice for this video wouldn't go amiss. I haven't spent that long on it. You can see the combustion chambers aren't perfect, but it's not bad. Okay, now I took 20th thou off because I was aware that I had taken a bit too much out of the combustion chambers around these edges, and I thought that if I take have it skimmed, it'll bring that back a little bit, so it won't be so much of a problem with the head gasket, because I don't really want this area being blocked by head gasket or by the actual size of the chamber being smaller than that, because you'd effectively have a brick wall that it would be trying to flow against. 20th thou seemed to do the trick, and in fact you can see how it's just coming up to these waterways, and any more might have broken into it. Not a major problem, but something I was keen to try and avoid. I've also lightly plunged the surface of this, tried to smooth it up with some fine emery paper, the two sides, and I'm quite pleased with the results. But the proof's in the pudding, and whether it flows or not. I've aligned the head gasket to try and show what I was talking about before, and that you don't want these hidden underneath that line. That will probably actually compress out, and will probably actually get in the way a bit, but it's not as bad as it could have been. In fact, it's probably okay in most cases. My main concern is this one here, where I have overdone it a tad, and that probably will affect flow. But we'll have to wait and see. Right, so we've reached a stage where we want to put the valves back on. So, give your valve a wash in petrol or terps or something similar, and then give it a rub down and dry it out. Here's one I prepared earlier. Then use some graphite and grease and spread a little bit over there. This is to give it something to use for lubrication when the engine first starts up. It's not exactly very easy doing this when you're trying to hold a video camera at the same time, but you get the general gist. Get some graphite on there. Hey. When you've done that, you then get your head plonk your valve through like so. Then you get your valve Ujima flip. I never was very good at names, and for the life of me I can't remember what these are called now, but they come with your head gasket set, and they go, in theory, over the end of the valve there to stop the oil from coming up the guides, and you can push that down and get it in place, being careful not to damage your Ujima flip with your screwdriver, and that also helps to keep the valve in place. Then you get your springs. I've got for my 740 application rated Piper springs. Plonk spring on like so, and out of my cleaning fluid comes the valve cap, which sits on like that. Next is the fun part, using the valve spring compressor and a rogue tissue. Right, valve spring compressor, set it up correctly, then this is where it becomes fun. You basically, right, and you need to put that on and basically do the business which I cannot possibly do with one arm. So it will pause for a second, and there you have it. Next you have hours of fun with these little valve collets, which you need to get in to the valve. And they go, they're actually tapered a certain direction so that they're retained when the valve cap moves into that place and gets stuck there. So there's two of those, they go on like that. So you use a combination of a magnetised screwdriver and some graphite paste to manipulate them into position on your valve, and then you undo this when you're very sure that it's correct, and it should stay in place. It's like so, basically. And there's no way I can do this. He says as he does it. And the second one, hopefully, a similar fluky process. Ooh, ooh. This one's following a far more realistic procedural pattern in that it's stuck to bloody screwdriver. And that is in place. And then you undo this carefully. I can't possibly do that while I'm videoing it. And bingo, one done. 15 to go. Here we go, all finished. I had a brief panic when I thought I'd lost one collet, one single collet, which would have been a real bummer, but luckily I discovered it on the floor. So there you go. On to the next stage, which should be sorting out the shims and adjusting all the gaps and things. So that's the next stage. Watch this space. So the next part of this process is in the less glamorous location of my cellar, for the time being in any case. And as I said, it is making the shims the correct size so that we've got the correct gaps. The gaps are, for the exhaust side of things, 10 thou, and for the inlet side, 8 thou. And what you do is you take material off of this face of the shim until you get the correct gap. I'll go into the intricacies of the process later, but for now you might have seen earlier on that Dave had made quite an elaborate little machine to actually enable the shims to be ground down evenly across the surface. Now I don't have access to his metalworking facilities, a welder and everything else to make up what he did, but I do have a bench grinder and I do have a couple of woodworking saws. So what I've done is I've made this, having obtained this from RS, this piece of brass alloy, which is about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and I have drilled out a couple of holes and made a thread, one in this hole in the side here and one hole here, which happens to be the size of the inner diameter of the shim, so the shim will fit on top there snugly, and you can tighten it up with that screw. Don't need to tighten it up much, just enough to hold it in place, and it's a fairly tight fit. Now the important thing is, as I said, to try and keep the surface of the shim evenly ground down. So I've made this contraption here, which is a couple of bits of wood cut in a V, mounted on another piece of wood, and everything has to be carefully measured so that the grinder is in line with this thing, so that you've got the thing actually perpendicular to the face of the wheel as precisely as possible, and also it needs to be pretty much horizontal and in line with that. And what I used, of course, was a spirit level, and I can't demonstrate it here because my vice is in the way, not very well anyway, but it is even as it can be. And I did that by just mucking around with the positions of these to get it even, and then I've tried to make sure that the whole thing is parallel with this. This used to be a door on the side of my bench. There's a door, so that this whole thing, again using this against a couple of points on the grinder, and then running it down the face, and then measuring the gap there and there to make sure that that is all nice and square. So that means that I should be able to get a nice straight grind on the shim. Let's hope so anyway, otherwise it's back to Dave's. So the procedure is as follows. Take your cam and first in the carrier and remove any burrs by doing this kind of thing. It just takes the burrs off the bearings. And choose a follower, shim and hydraulic bit section. Place your follower into the, or even place your shim into the old hydraulic bit. Place it in here, which is not easy when you're trying to do it through a camera. Like so. Then place it in the carrier. So I tilted the carrier, or I tilted the head, to stop the things from falling out when you turn them upside down. Then put your camshaft back in place. With the bottom of the lobe down. Get your feeler gauges. Take some measurements. There's no space. You'll find that the raw shim, having not been had any work done to it, is much too big, and you probably notice the cam will actually rock. So you need to start grinding it down. Until the gap disappears, or rather until the gap appears or starts to appear, and then you can then grind down the rest of the shims to the same amount to save time, because there's quite a lot of material that's to come off the shim to start off with. So we take the shim out and put it in my contraption, where I've opted not to use the screw because it was getting in the way. And it's usually a tight enough fit to not worry about it too much. So that's the action to use, just to make sure you get a nice even grind on the shim. Then I've been cooling the shim in some water, because of course if it's hot it will expand and it may make a difference to your actual end result. Then place it in here, measure it, and then repeat the process until you've got a slight gap appearing or no gap and the thing in properly. Then make a note of the size using a micrometer, and then you can do all the rest of the shims to the same amount, and that gives you a starting point, so you don't have to grind it all the way down every time, and you can run off all the shims to that same value and then use that as the point to start work. This one is actually at the point where it's fairly close to being right, and you can see how thin that is. When it started off, there was about a good 3 or 4 mils in thickness more than the size of this thing now. Then you carry this procedure out in pairs, because the two followers can be done at the same time, because the actual cams, of course, in the same position. So I'm on the second pair, and I've just placed them in, having had their initial rub down, and I've got number 3, which just about 3/1000 just about goes in under there, but won't go in under there. So I need to grind that down and keep grinding it down, and literally 1 turn of the grind is not too far off 1/1000. but you're obviously going to have to play around with that to get an idea of how much is taken off with each go. And and on the inlets you want a gap of between 8 and 9 thou, and on the exhaust you want a gap of 10 thou. And to avoid problems, I'm marking up absolutely everything: the shim, the hydraulic section, defunct hydraulic section, and the follower, so that I don't get them mixed up at any stage. And here's a few ready to go, with the roughly the right amount taken out. That's the sort of amount you're taking off when you start to get close, and when you're very close you're down to literally a rotation of 1 turn, and maybe even half a turn if you're very close, and then it falls out like so. Oops, and it's probably lost that. I've already lost one. It went into the grinder and never to be seen again somewhere in this cellar. And I just give it a dip to cool it down afterwards sometimes. Well, another thing while I think of it, the 2 cams for the 740 at any rate are the same. They're identical, the cams. The only difference being that there's a pin that you need to get hold of from Rover or some equivalent supplier that goes in the end of the cam for the distributor drive. They're about 5 or 6 quid. There is a part number, but I'm damned if I can remember off the top of my head what it is. But what I've decided to do is to make sure that I've got my cams labelled, so that if there is any differences in the tolerances with these things, that I'm not going to get them mixed up and muck up all my shim gaps at a later stage. Of course, it goes without saying that you need to make sure that there's absolutely no grit or rubbish on any of these surfaces, otherwise it will muck up your gaps. And that includes the little rim around the edge of the shim in particular, where you can easily get a piece of grit that mucks up everything. Right, an example of a cock up here, and it's advisable to get yourself 2 or 3 spare shims. Okay, this is supposed to be at 8 thou. There's my 8 thou. It's just trying to put my knee on it to make sure it's tightly down. That one is very close. It's probably a tiny bit small. This one goes in very easily, so I think check it with a 10. Oh dear, that goes in as well. So I'm going to have to use a spare one on that. This one that's very, very close, the end one, will literally need probably half a rotation to get it right. You can just hear the cam lifting. So let's have a go at that. Needed about a turn and a half in the end, but I put that down to me not applying the same sort of pressure with one hand on the camcorder. So it's actually possibly a little bit too loose. This is your 8. And as ever, when I'm trying to do it with one hand, I lose track of the 10 altogether. And there's just be the only one that's No, magnet's trying to get in on the act. Where's it gone? Never do this live on television. There it is. 10. It does go, it's a squash. I can feel the cam moving up a bit. It'll have to do because I haven't got any more shims, but I'm a little bit worried about it. But having said that, the difference between 8 and 9 was, there was no difference on my feeler gauges between 8 and 9. No detectable, no noticeable difference. So I'm hoping that it's going to be okay. Well, I managed to frig it. So what I did was I swapped the shims over. This is a trick you can use, and you can also save shims for later on that you've overdone, in the hope that they'll be usable on another follower. Now, through swapping them over, this is the 10. It's difficult when I'm not using those, but you can hear the cam lifting. And with the 8, so that's a relief, because I thought I'd cocked up 2 and I managed to salvage 1, and then I'll use the spare shim on here. Bingo, it worked. Success, all done. Now I'm going to spray them with a bit of WD-40 because they do like to rust. Okay, another task I'm carrying out while I'm waiting for the pistons and rods is to put my followers, shims, camshafts, etc. into the head and then bolt up the cam carrier. Good idea is to do this in the front room on the floor, guaranteed to go down well with the wife or the other half or whatever. So that's what I'm doing. For me, I'm moving out soon, so I'm not too worried, although I won't be getting it very dirty because everything's spanking clean. The only risk factor is the new oil and the graphite paste which I've got with me. Now what I've done already with the inlet cam is I've put the distributor rotating mechanism into the cam. Now that has to go in about the same position as the one that would have come out from the previous head. In this case I've measured up, tried to accurately work out the position with respect to the lobe, and then placed this in the right way around and then bashed it with a hammer to get it in, and that seems to have worked. So that's now in place, because the new cams tend to come without that. You have to buy that separately for about a £5 from Rover or Lotus or wherever. So I've completed that already. Now what I'm doing then is I'm taking each of my numbered followers and shims, and I am pulling the shims apart, putting a bit of oil in and putting a bit of graphite paste in, and then liberally coating the shims, the followers and everything else in a mixture, a combination of oil and graphite paste. The graphite helps a little bit with the running in and kind of initial startup process, and it's quite sticky, so it stops things from falling to bits when you're trying to insert them, and the followers and the shims and the bits and pieces that are all interconnected. Stops them from falling to bits. So that's the situation with regards to that. So I'm carrying on with this, pulling them out, putting the guns on, placing them in, until I've got the whole lot in place. So I've now done the followers and shims and put those in place, and I'm going to cover the cams with graphite, make sure that they're well lubricated. Over here I've cleaned up the surfaces, and I've paid particular attention to the oilways, making sure there's no old gasket material or sealant material rather in those oilways, because they're quite narrow and thin, and I've cleaned up the whole of that. Okay, so I've now covered the camshaft lobes and bearings with graphite, and I've also inserted the little keys which I had to pull out from the other head, the cams that were on the other head, to put them into the new cams. Did this using some mole grips to actually slightly crush the spring clip key, and then ease that out, and then put them in using the mole grips and tap them in with the hammer gently at the end of that. So now ready to put the cam carrier on. The cylinder head kit comes with gasket solution sealant, and it shows you where to put it in the manual, and it also tells you the bolt tightening sequence order. So they need to be progressively tightened to 10 newtons per meter. I'll spread the gasket material sealant, I keep calling it gasket material sealant, on. The best way to seems to be to put a little bit on the end of the brush and then to spread it over gently, rather than to try and to apply it with the plastic tube and then to spread it on later. I think I've more or less covered it, so it's cam carrier finally to go on time. There are a couple of locating dowels for lining the camshaft carrier too, which I've lined up, and now you put the bolts in and tighten them to that sequence as mentioned. Okay, I've completed the tightening up sequence, and there you have it. I will at some stage flood this with oil to give it an extra bit of lubrication. So next thing to do is to fit the oil seals. Now they're in pairs, black and red or reddy brown, like so. The black oil seals are fitted at the front of the engine, and the red oil seals are fitted at the rear. And now that the cams and cam carriers bolted down properly, you have to be careful of the valves and all the gubbins below there not getting bent by putting them down on a surface. I'm sort of leaning it on an old, I think it's a thermal vest, but yeah, just be careful of that, especially if you're not carrying the process out on the front room carpet. Now, in order to fit these, it advises in the manual the use of a special tool, which doesn't look much far off a socket, the appropriate size socket, as long as it is the correct size, which needs to be very slightly smaller than the outer diameter of the seal. Don't quote me on this, this is what I use. I don't necessarily recommend it. You have to be very careful about the size you choose, and then tap that in with a hammer. There you go. Make sure they go in the right way round, which is that way round. Right, I'm now about to replace the thermostat housing using a bit of Holomar gasket on the gasket that I've got there. You should really use a new one, but I haven't got one, so I'm thinking that gasket stuff should do the trick. And with the bolts, for every bolt under the sun, I recommend using copper slip or copper grease on the bolts to give a better chance of getting them undone at the end of the day. This should be tightened to 10 Newton meters. And now I'm fitting the distributor back plate and the rotor arm, which I've cleaned the surface of a bit with some fine emery paper, just to get rid of all the arcing and all the rest of it. So I'm just gonna put a tiny tab of Loctite on the nut, and I'm tightening that up now. So I have just taken the car to Emerald Cams, and Dave Walker, famous for his articles in Cars and Car Conversions, now known as CCC, and other magazines, and we put it on the rolling road, and we identified that there seems to be a lower compression than would be expected, and that there seems to be some bleed down through the inlet valves. The air is actually escaping rather than being maintained. So I've pulled the head off and having to carry out some further modifications to fix my errors. So here we go, on with the tape. Right, I've stripped the head, ready to take it back to Dave Andrews, and have found out that, as we suspected, the inlet valves to seats are not making proper contact. Now if you look at the inlet valves and I start to adjust, you can actually see dark patches and light patches. Let's have a good look. You can hear me on the video in the other room as I recorded. You see the dark patches where perhaps exhaust gases have been escaping through, and the light patches where it's been making good contact, clearly showing that the seats were not doing what they should have been in all cases. Similarly with the valve. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can adjust this a bit better. If I turn it around, you can see light patches and dark patches. So hopefully it should be a simple matter of recutting the seats, grinding the valves in again, and then redoing the shims. And that's tomorrow's job. I've got all my bits and pieces ready to take to Dave. All labelled up. Ready? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Don't start, Babs.
We said that the valve seats were hammering, Babs, that wasn't the idea. I've had a close look at Lorne's head, and he's been a bit over-enthusiastic with the inlet inserts and left them a bit thin around the short turn here. We've just replaced them with some larger inserts, but I can illustrate where it's happening. This corner here had been cut away and the insert was almost fractured, and that's because it was left way too thin. It had gone over the recommended size for the valve throats, and the valves had hammered the insert into the head, and they were on the point of dropping, which could have caused a disaster. My local machine shop has helped us out and done a very nice, neat, quick job in putting some larger inserts in the head so that we can use larger inlet valves. I just happen to have some here that were for another job that won't be due for another couple of months. So this is the old valve, 29.5mm. They're the new ones going in. Whoops. As you can see, they're quite a lot larger, so big valve Lorne. We've now had the seats cut. I now need to do the valve throats to the correct size, making sure I don't go too thin on the inserts. I've got a gauging valve here, which is 27.5mm, which is the first rough cut. And then it should be straightforward to lap the valves in. Hopefully we'll get the whole job done today, redo all the valve seats, reshim the cam, assemble it, and he can take it away with a smile on his face. But I listen for everybody, do take care and make sure you use the sizing valves. A 25.5mm valve is the right size for the valve throat. If it's any bigger than that, then you've gone too big. And these valve throats are way, way bigger. So Lorne's just gone a bit OTT. Make sure you don't do the same. Okay, back to work. So I'm using a tree cutter. The chap who put the inserts in has put a nice 60-degree lead in, but the throats are way too small. They should be around 27.5mm. They're currently more like 26. So I'm going to weight them up to about 27.5 and then polish them out just a touch more, so we get a nice radius leading into the valve seat. You can't make the valve throat too much bigger or you hit water. So we won't be able to get them as big as on that modified VVC head over there, but we will be able to get them reasonable. So, here we go. Again, keep it in line with the guide.
There's the modified VVC head.
If you go around the other side, you can see the inlet throats there. There's one done for Warren at Piper Cams. There's a big valve VVC head. Are you still recording?
Yep.
Yeah, good. And you can see the valve throats are actually quite large. We've got a 28mm valve here, which goes down quite comfortably and right the way through. 29, almost. 29 would be too large. Goes in just. There's a lot more valve area here than on the smaller valve heads, and the inserts here would take a larger exhaust valve as well. And the ports obviously are a lot bigger.
Okay.
That's pretty much the ultimate head for the K series. That's the same as on Pete Carmichael's 250 horsepower K, and on the same head, same spec as on Mike B's 242 horsepower 1700 K. So it's had a fair bit of work done on it. You're getting fairly close to the limits of the casting. You go much further.
And there's no problem with the waterways over here either.
No, it's missing on this head. Thank goodness.
Okay.
Just relieving around new inserts we had put in. There's a bit of a lip, so we're getting rid. It won't be a perfect job because we're short of time, but we'll get there. Do a slightly different approach here because we're going to use up a shed load of jiffy caps. It's a joint fit, mate.
I might as well mention that those valves that are in there are not the valves that I'm going to be using there.
They're old VVC valves that we're using as blanks, so it doesn't matter if we lunch them. Well, that's the idea. We don't like them anymore because they're horrible old rover valves and they're really duffy. Say good night, Vienna, valve. Prepare to meet thy doom. Got rid of most of it. I've done this before. You want to take a shot of the head as finished now with your extra big valves. Inlet ports as opened up, new inserts in here. This one, the combustion chamber was too low to recover there, but here it's fine. We've cut the seat, it's got a 60-degree cut in the radius into the seat. You can see the throats are quite a bit larger. I'm just lapping one valve now to see how they go and if they're easy. I'll give it to Lorne to do, because I'm a lazy worthless kid.
It doesn't look as fresh as it did before, but that's only because it's had loads of carbon and rubbish on it. But that doesn't matter, because it doesn't affect the flow.
These inserts won't move.
We've got
There's
the
at least
import
4 mil of inserts into the casting, so they're well and truly there, they're not going to move. And as it was, the ports were oversized, so they suit the new valves perfectly. Should get a nice little power boost out of it as well. Every home should have one. Snap-on valve grinding tool. Got a suction thing inside that really makes sure it grips the valve and doesn't fall off. In fact, they're a complete bastard to get off. Push that down on the valve. Lovely.
much better than those wooden things that you get in the
Certainly
DIY
be.
shops.
Certainly be. Now, what you're looking for, the valve is always going to go in okay because they're guaranteed circular. What you're looking for on the seat inserts is a nice light matte grey finish all the way around the seat, which we've got. The only way you're going to see it light grey is to clean it with carb cleaner, give it a good wipe with your wife's knickers. You can see there's a nice even matte grey seat all the way around, so that's perfect. So we're ready for the next one, so we'll just clean the valve.
Okay. So this is the inlets, how they're looking now. Okay, it's a little bit mucky looking, but that's only because we haven't bothered to clean it all up. It will soon get itself dirty anyway, but Dave's pretty happy with it. I'm pretty happy with it, so hopefully it'll do the business this time. So here we go, the inlets with the new 32.5mm valves. And a dishwasher in the background for sound effects. There you go, you can see just how much tighter it is around here compared to what it was like before. That's not my baby, it's on the TV. So that completes the cylinder head modifications. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. It's good this, isn't it?